The thing about the Phantasm world is there really are no rules. That's what makes those movies scary, is because you don't know what's going to pop up around the next corner.
It's a dream.
It's only a dream.
No, it's not.
By 1987, I had gotten an opportunity to work on two of the most famous horror sequels. My first movie was Day of the Dead, and then a couple years later I worked on Evil Dead 2. So I remember seeing, obviously, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead in the theaters, and Evil Dead 1 as well. So it was, I found myself sort of on this path of, you know, getting the opportunity to work on these cool films. You know, you're sitting in the movie theater watching zombies attack the Monroeville Mall, and you never in your mind think, I'm gonna work on one of these movies someday. Evil Dead, you know, you're watching the guy in the cabin go crazy, and you're like, you never think about it. Same with Phantasm. The first Phantasm is a really powerful movie. The imagery is great, it's creepy, it's moody, great movie. It's a really quintessential 70s horror movie. I would have never imagined sitting in the theater watching that movie that I would have had a chance to be standing on set with Angus. So when I moved to Los Angeles in 1985, I had worked at a couple shops, and I became really good friends with Mark Shostrom. I basically ran his studio for 3 years. So in November of 1987, we started prepping for Phantasm 2. And there was a bunch of meetings with Don Coscarelli. There really wasn't any reference in terms of visually how stuff was supposed to look. It was really, it was all just making things that kind of look creepy and grotesque.
That's that close. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Good, yeah, that's great.
What the fuck was that? Sort of recreating gags from the original movie, but with a little more technical savvy, because they're being done by a real effects house instead of just by a couple friends. Similar to Evil Dead 1. I mean, I always used to say that Evil Dead 1 is one of the most powerful horror movies. And sometimes what takes you out of it is that it just feels like they were sort of making stuff in the cabin sink and then throwing it on people. I mean, that's why having done Evil Dead 2, where everything was just technically cleaner, Phantasm 2 was very similar. So we started prepping for Phantasm 2, and I remember the first thing that they told us was, oh, well, Angus is coming back as the tall man.
This is a tall man, half the tall man's face. Angus Scrimm is his name. Star of Phantasm.
That's a screen name.
Screen name.
One of the first things that we did was Angus came into the shop and we did life casts of him for the finale of the film, which involved him being stabbed by the embalming fluid and all the yellow ooze and everything starts pouring out of him.
This here is the tall man, which melts down. He melts down. This is the final stage where he's, it's not finished yet, but it will be soon. And his flesh is melting off.
So that was one of the first instances that we had with the actors coming in.
Hi, how are you? I'm Darcy, and I'm from the Delaney dating service, and I'm looking for a rotted type of a man.
It was also the character who plays Kemi, Samantha Phillips, if I'm not mistaken. There was a whole scene where she had an autopsy scar on her chest. I remember sculpting the chest because we had to do a nude chest cast of her. It was kind of one of the first, you know, everyone's like, oh, wow, did you get to cast her body? It's probably the most unromantic thing you can ever do because you have a bunch of people around with alginate on their hands and they're getting ready to do the cast of the actress's body, and you kind of go, you don't want to, I mean, you don't want to go, oh, this is great. You want, you know, you're being professional. And one of the first sequences we shot was when the dwarfs invade the house. Shit. I remember because it was Christmas of '87, and I actually was the only person that didn't fly home for Christmas, so I stayed on set with all the masks. I mean, in the first movie, you never see them. They kind of look like Jawas from Star Wars. In Phantasm 2, we really wanted to get a sense that they were kind of evil, creepy-looking caricatures of the people that have been shrunken down by the tall man's machinery.
These are the dwarvies. Masks. Tons of masks. And
which one did you sculpt, Bob?
Charles Bronson dwarf. And the Boris Karloff dwarf.
The masks were all designed for the hooded dwarves to be almost a little alien-like. I remember the one that I sculpted, the eyes were a little further apart. We just wanted them to look weird. And I remember the one that we sculpted for the grandmother that Everett Burrell sculpted.
Elizabeth.
Oh my God. Grandma.
It even had a little eyeshadow painted on it. We took pictures of her and it sort of looked like her because it still had kind of like chubby cheeks and was real pleasant looking, but it was demonic at the same time.
Sorry, Grandma.
So we did a whole bunch of sculptures and a whole bunch of slip latex masks that a bunch of little kids wore. And then we had a cable-operated mechanical head that could sneer and the mouth could open and close.
Soon to be working mechanical head for the dwarf. So the dwarf snarls and stuff and all that good crap, you know.
David Barton was the mechanic. So we actually had a mechanical dwarf face. And that was shot for inserts that you could, just for a quick shot of a snarl.
Here we go, ready, and action. And snarl, and bite, and bite, and bite, and bite.
The second film really takes the story to a completely different level. We see so much more. When they go to the alien planet and you see all the rows of the dwarves walking off into the distance, which were like sticks with the robes put on them. And then in the foreground, you see one of the canisters open and out spills a full body version of one of the dwarfs. It's creepy. It was all wet and gooey. The guy who played that character was Ed Gale, who also wore the Chucky suit in all the Child's Play movies. And I know that Mark Sjostrom sculpted all that stuff, and he used National Geographic photos of the bog people. You know, the idea that you see them and all the wrinkles, everything is sort of like, looks like it's been compressed into the flesh. So it was really specific. And then we just literally put him into a barrel filled with ultra slime and methocel. So the point when you tip it over, he literally shoots out like a bullet.
Action!
I remember there was one dream sequence that we did where Paula Irvine, and you see her sitting there and they pull back where her shirt is and you see this sort of cancerous, bulbous-like creature rise out of her back.
You play a good game, boy.
We had a foam latex back appliance that was sculpted that had a little trench created for the hand puppet. It was basically a big sleeve that somebody wore, so they would stick their hand in there. And on action, the thing would undulate a little bit, and then the actor, I think it was Everett, would turn the head out and turn it towards camera, and then we had a little lip mechanism on it so that it could talk.
Come east if you dare.
Get the fuck back!
This is a highly top secret thing here. Top secret. This here is a What is this?
Silver Sphere.
Silver Sphere?
All the Silver Sphere effects were all done by Steve Patino, and if I recall, there was a whole bunch of different balls. He made so many different versions of those Silver Spheres, but there was one that the motor the drill just spun. It didn't go in, it just spun, and it had like a sort of a spiral on it, so when it spun, it looked like it was actually traveling. And then we had the tubes went into that, so there was a lot of instances where, you know, the actor would always reach up and grab it, and, you know, you'd see, ooh, and then start doing this, and the balls shooting all the blood and the brain matter. And I remember going to Steve's shop, and he was working out different ways to project the spheres, and he had the Silver Spheres on monofilament guidelines, and he took 2 sticks and he would go zing and pull the sticks apart, and the sphere would shoot down the wire into a furniture pad. And then I remember other times where he just had a slingshot. He's like, oh, if you really want to get a good shot of the Silver Sphere going down the hall, you do this. And he would slingshot the ball, and of course it would hit the wall and explode into 1,000 pieces. When Kenneth Tiger gets his ear chopped off, I mean, Kurtzman sculpted all those pieces, and the way we shot that gag was, we actually had Kenneth lying on a board, and we just dropped the Silver Sphere right past his head between him and the camera, and yanked the ear off with a piece of monofilament. So everything was shot on an angle, and then when you looked at the footage played back, it looked like he's standing there, and the ear, you know, the ear got yanked off. The interesting thing about all the Phantasm films is the balls always become more technologically advanced. It's just not good enough in the first movie to just have a sphere that sticks in your head and sucks your brains out. Now it has to be able to chop your ears off and chop you up. And then, of course, there was the super ball, which was the gold sphere. And that enters into the guy's stomach and goes up through his shirt. And then we see it come out his mouth. Bob sculpted this big, sort of fleshy face with a bunch of little serrated edges, and we actually created, Steve Patino created the drill part of the ball with all the blades that was hooked up to a little battery. So the actor was sitting there wearing a big prosthetic with his neck and his jaw distended, and then the gold ball with the little motor, and then the blade, so that off camera we could just push the 2 wires together and go woo, 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 and just kind of turn a little bit. It was really cool. There's a shot where the Silver Sphere hits Angus in the head. We had a fake head of him, foam latex skin, which is simple. Nothing was radio controlled back then. It was all just cable. And the idea was that we had one shot where we pushed this creature out that was like this kind of little purple leech-looking thing with little pinchers on the end. So we pushed it out, and then it would be moving around. And then, of course, he grabs James LeGros. He's going, and the little creature's there kind of trying to get at him. And then I think he reaches up and pulls it off, if I recall, and then yellow ooze spurts everywhere, of course. Of course, the sequence where the tall man sort of explodes at the end of the movie, it was the same thing. We created a variety of makeup stages, and this was Mark's baby. Mark spent most of the film working on the prosthetics for Angus's face, but there were various stages that he went through with bladder makeups, with ooze going up to them, and I know that Mark and Bob Kurtzman applied all the makeup.
Okay, that's fine. Ready, and action. Ah! Poor darling.
You would see the blisters appear, and then he would start to, the flesh would start to drip off. I even remember them using, for the neck piece, they actually went to the Ralph's and picked up chicken skin and off of a chicken breast and super glued it to the appliance. So you had a kind of a meaty piece of flesh hanging off the neck. It was a really good sequence the way that it was designed and directed by Don. We also made a resin skeletal hand, and then we put that hand into the mold and filled the mold with colored gelatin, and then painted the hand so that we mounted the hand to the wall and got one of those big industrial heaters and shot the hand melting at 3 frames a second, so that the hand did the old Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of just dripped away. So in the sequence, you see his face start to ooze, and then you see these pustules appear, and then yellow ooze shooting out, and then his hand melts, and then we made a face of Angus with vacuum form eyelids and chambers behind him that was filled to tubes with air and yellow goo, so that we could hit the button and it would blow the eyes out. So we were sort of borrowing from a lot of the movies that had influenced us up to that point. You know, I mean, then it was Scanners and Raiders of the Lost Ark and all the bladder makeups. Dick Smith, you know, Mark Shostrom was always very, very heavily influenced by Dick Smith. And you can really see it in the effects with the bladder makeups and the melting hands and the eyes being blown out. I just remember how much fun it was.
Jody, I was up in Morningside Cemetery, and I cut off the finger of the tall man, and it changed it in this thing! Where'd it go?
That was the eve of the last film that I would do as a freelance, because we started K&B almost right around the ending of Phantasm 2. Howard and Bob and I had gotten contacted by Scott Spiegel and Sam Raimi to do this movie called Night Crew, which became the first K&B film. Really, really, really low budget. I think they paid us $3,000 to do all of the makeup effects in the whole movie. We would work at Shostrom's during the day, and then Kurtzman and I would drive from South Pasadena and shoot all night with Scott, and then go back to Shostrom's in the morning. And there was even a couple times when we were supposed to be on set in Chatsworth for Phantasm. And I remember a couple nights when Bob actually fell asleep because we had worked all night, and Mark would be like, "What's the matter with him?" I don't know, I don't think he's feeling really well. We were able at that point to break the dreaded catch-22 of, well, you can't supervise your own show unless you've supervised a show. So by 1990, I mean, literally within a couple years of the company's inception, we had done Gross Anatomy, Dances with Wolves, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Halloween 5, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tales from the Dark Side. From 88 to like 92, 93, all of a sudden, it peppered in between a lot of these other films, it would be something like Misery or City Slickers or, you know, mainstream movies. By 95, 96, it was, you know, we had done Reservoir Dogs, we'd done Pulp Fiction, we were about to start Spawn and Men in Black, and all of a sudden we were doing big movies. We've been tremendously fortunate, and our relationships with guys like Sam Raimi and John Carpenter and Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, who we've worked with on numerous films. I mean, and Don, of course. You know, I mean, we've done probably 4 projects with Don Coscarelli. We even went back on Phantasm 4 and did a couple gags for him because we've been friends with Don since 1987. After that, we went on, we did Bubba Hotep, and we're doing a show with Don right now. So it's really rewarding.